So this video was originally going to be about Sonic Superstars. If you haven't seen, Sega said that it was a disappointment. A lot of people was voicing their opinions on that, and I was going to talk about it as well. But as someone who's played Sonic Superstars and didn't think it was, the worst game to ever exist, I was thinking, why does this game really suffer? And the main thing I came to was Sonic's timeline. So in this video, we're going to talk about it, and I'm going to talk about why I feel like Sonic doesn't need a timeline and how it actually holds him back. So the first point I've got written down here is that it just doesn't even make sense. If you search up Sonic's timeline and look at Reddit and YouTube videos and stuff like that, everyone has a different timeline. People believe different things to what's canon and what's not canon, to the point where it's just impossible to follow along the actual Sonic timeline. There is times where Sega actually come out and tell you when a Sonic game is set, but normally they are in interviews and not in the actual main game, so you won't find out unless you are reading interviews and like newsletters consistently. So if you do miss this out and you have made a timeline and then people on Reddit are telling you it's wrong because you didn't watch this interview from 2023 telling you when Sonic Superstars, it's just to the point where I genuinely believe, just let it go. Let it go, start a new timeline if you want. I think since Sonic's been around for that long now, we know what characters are meant to show up in the games, we know what Sonic's about, we know what villains he has. I think it's fine to just make games kind of like Mario. Mario doesn't have a timeline, and they utilize this by just doing whatever they want whenever they feel like it. Like Mario Odyssey, they didn't have to explain why there's a floating cap that can make Mario turn into dinosaurs. Like, they just didn't have to do that. It was just a unique concept and they ran with it. Sega don't have that freedom with Sonic. They have to make him make sense to what he's about, and that definitely holds him back in a lot of regards. The next point I've got written down is that it affects his 2D games. The 2D games are struggling because they're trying to cram them in between like 3 games they made over 20-30 years ago, and Sonic Superstars definitely suffers from this. I think it's meant to be in between Sonic 2 and Sonic 3, which obviously makes it hard for certain characters to show up. That's why there wasn't really too many characters in Sonic Superstars, and they can't really do too much with his powers and stuff like that, because if they do, it won't make sense for modern Sonic, to the point where people will just be confused to why Sonic can't do the things he used to do in the classic games. It's really sad because I think Sonic Superstars had a really nice art style. I liked the feel of the game. It just felt like they had to play it safe for it to make sense in the timeline, when they could have just made it like a spin-off and just done whatever they wanted with it. Add characters like Shadow, Silver, Blaze. I think the internet would go crazy if 2D Shadow was announced, 2D Silver, all of that. There'd be so much hype around the game. They could work out ways to add their powers to 2D games and make them truly interesting. And then if they wanted to make this classic Sonic type of, timeline, they could make games for classic Sonic but as its own character instead of being in modern Sonic's footsteps. Make 3D games with him, make racing games, make whatever you want with classic Sonic. I love the classic version of Sonic. I love the art style. I love the vibes. I would love to see just more than 2D games with this character. The third point I've got written down is they've done spin-off games in the past, and while they're not the best games in the franchise, I think they are really cool idea-wise, and that is Sonic and the Secret Rings and Sonic and the Black Knight. Some really cool stuff came from these games. I really liked the story for these games. The whole idea of Sonic being sucked into a storybook and living out that story with his own characters. He's the main character with new powers, a new world, unique villains that don't have to come back because they're obviously storybook villains. Like seeing Sonic run about just absolutely slicing everyone up with a sword, that is a very cool thing. He's obviously got the new forms like Dark Spine Sonic, one of the coolest forms they've ever made for him. And they was going to make a third one, but obviously the sales weren't the best for these 2 games. But I really think if they went back towards the storybook idea, they would do a lot better these days, especially since they're not limited to motion controls, because Sonic and the Secret Rings definitely suffered from that. I would definitely love to see another storybook game for Sonic. The next point we've got on is Sonic Riders. Now, I wasn't going to talk about Sonic Riders because I just assumed it was a spin-off, but when people are trying to put Sonic Riders into the timeline of the main Sonic, it's clearly confusing to Sonic fans if Sonic Riders is a spin-off or not. And if it is canon, when is it set? Is it even canon to begin with? Is it a different dimension? Is it even the main version of Sonic? All these things we don't know, and that is because obviously they've tried to establish a timeline in every game they've ever made. So when they do make a game like Sonic Riders, people immediately think, is this canon to Sonic? I think the obvious answer is mostly no, but when you've got this MCUR timeline, people are going to naturally assume it is part of it. Like I kind of said at the beginning, it just gives them so much freedom. Like, you can bring back anything you want if you're not limited by a timeline. Like, if you're bored and you don't know what to do for your game, bring back Hypersonic. You know the entire community would absolutely blow up. You don't need to explain how the Super Chaos Emerald somehow made it back to Sonic's original verse. Just do it, man. Bring back, Metal Sonic in his absolute massive obese form. Just bring back the cool stuff that gets the community absolutely crazy. Bring back Methiles, or however you say his name. Just bring people back. It's cool. And if they want to make a timeline in the future, just make it a straight line instead of a jagged line. Don't make it confusing. Don't change it consistently, because you've got different people coming up with different ideas that affects the timeline. Just make it nice and easy to follow, like around the Sonic Adventure era. They had a really good string of games that made complete sense. And then after Shadow the Hedgehog, they had like 5 different endings for that game. I feel like the storyline just went all over the place after that point, especially because they started neglecting certain characters. Shadow didn't have a game since Shadow the Hedgehog. They'd invent characters like Silver and then he'd just not exist forever. But yeah, that's just my opinion. Obviously, a lot of people are going to enjoy seeing Sonic's timeline and how he progresses in games. But I think when you've been around for so long, like Sonic has, it gets to a point where you outgrow your timeline, and it makes it harder to make games like 2D Sonic. Like 2D Sonic could genuinely not exist anymore, because there's only so much you can cram in between Sonic 1 and Sonic 3. Like you're very limited there. But yeah, like I said, that's just my opinion. Tell me what you guys think down in the comments, and I will see you in the diddly damn next one.